Fascinating.
Hi there, and welcome to this video for Widget animated menu demo. So just to run through what our menu does. At the moment I've got it assigned to the M key, and then it pops up like a little sort of TV bug in the top right hand corner. So the interaction that I have currently set up is that when I roll over it, the menu appears, and when I click it, it shuts. So that's a sort of design choice. So, obviously a bit of user testing, see how intuitive that is. And that can be tweaked just to kind of click it on and click it off if that's more intuitive. So what we have, as you'll have noticed, is that the boxes fade on first and then the controls fade in after. So that's a little fiddly because it means that each of those elements has to be unique in the timeline for the widget animation. But let's have a look at that. It's fairly straightforward in terms of keyframing and adding values. If we go to the bug menu widget, that then shows you the kind of foundation of the layout. Now, I tend to do all my layouts in whatever, InDesign or Illustrator, and just sort of work out the proportions of everything. Now, I've been a little bit lazy here in terms of nesting things correctly, and I'll explain that in an advanced widget video. But what's kind of good is that because we have our ability to anchor, and in this instance I've anchored everything to the top right, because we have that reference, it's pretty robust. Things don't fall out because I am anchoring everything to the top right of any screen, really. But what you will note is that I've got different panels, and then I have checkboxes, and I have text that have all been brought in and just sort of organized in that way, and just lined up using all of these functions. Now, when you create more advanced widgets, a lot of that kind of alignment is handled for you. And I'll explain. It's very similar to sort of HTML, of elements being nested in other wrappers, and then the sort of spacing being worked out based on proportion, and it's really, really, really powerful. So I have been a little bit lazy here just to kind of get the effect. But if I did have all my controls wrapped in the same box as the panel, then if I wanted to fade that up individually, it'd be better off just to sort of leave it how I've done it now. So if we look at the timeline, all the animation happens over a second. So the bulk of the animation actually happens in the last quarter of a second, when everything kind of fades up. All the checkboxes and the text is over that last quarter of a second. Before then, it's just the boxes fading up. So you'll see, for example, on this component part, which is a checkbox, the value is 0. The render opacity is the channel, is the track that I'm modifying. So here we've got render opacity. I've added that to the checkbox availability track, and I set that to 0. So it's set to 0 again there at 0.75. That last quarter of a second, rather, where it fades up, then that value changes. So that is that same principle applied to all the other component parts. And because they're not nested, I've had to do it on a kind of individual component basis. So it's a little bit more legwork, but it gives me the effect that I want. So now looking at some of the controls that we have. So here on panel one is a button. So you can see, like we had with our logo button, we've got an image representing that button. And then the only thing that I've actually done is on rollover, I've affected the alpha channel. So it's just a slight difference to give the user a bit of feedback that the rollover has instigated something. Now, the trigger for that, as we know at the bottom here, on click. So here we have this bit of blueprint script where we're starting off with a camera fade so that we're snapping out of our viewport, screen turns black, and we're fading up, and then also creating our level sequence player and then playing that just through that button click. And we are then also continuing our flow into this animation which closes the menu. So if the menu is open and you press play, after all of this has happened in the flow, the menu closes. So you would have seen that when we played that a moment ago. Let's have a look at that again just to demonstrate that. Click, roll over. When I press play, the menu will close itself. Okay, very easily. Checkbox, drag them in, and again, you've got quite a lot of control over the style of these. I've kind of restyled them and removed the kind of slightly dated default settings to something a bit more befitting to this branding and the kind of box idea. So it's a much kind of harder graphic. And then each of these again has events that you can call on it. So here, for example, with checkboxes, the event is on check state changed. So what happens when you turn it on? What happens when you turn it off? So here I'm looking at when it is on, I am creating an availability HUD, which I'll demo in a moment. I'm saving that locally. I'm adding that to the viewport. And then when I'm turning the checkbox off, I'm taking that availability HUD, which I've saved locally here, and removing it from the parent. So this, in effect, is a switch between it being checked on and off. So the same thing for the facilities checkbox. Exactly the same, facilities HUD, and then I know when I turn off that second checkbox, it will remove it from the viewport. And then what I'm also doing, I'm accessing the setup actor because I'm controlling the post-process because I'm turning that on. And actually I could affect that now. I could in fact put a custom event to fade it back in because at the moment we've got it faded out, so that's not going to work. What we will need to do in fact is set the blend weight back to 1 on that. I think it's enabled anyway, it won't make a difference to have that still on. So in theory that should now work when we try that. Let's have a look. It should now go grey again. Oops, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So it's instigated that post-process and changed the blend weight back to 1. So coming back to our bug menu, our third checkbox controls our lights. Now our lights are set up as a separate level. So we can turn them on and off here. Yeah. So this is a really good way of kind of handling different information that you want to kind of turn on or off en masse. And it then just means that all we need to do is reference that level and enable it or disable it. So really, really powerful for kind of managing lots of different elements within your scene. And it could be for a different layout of furniture between for an interior. It could be all sorts of different uses. In this case, we've used it for the light. So we have a checkbox that effectively turns on that level. So if we come back down here and look at on checked state changed. So true and false, if it's checked or unchecked. If it's true, then load streaming level. And there we are, lighting night is that, make visible after load, fairly straightforward. And then when we turn it off, it removes it. Now we do have a bit of other logic here, which I will go into a little bit later, but that's the kind of basics of switching a level on or off. And then we have a couple of sliders as well. So we can determine the values of our sliders. So here, time of day gives us some control over values. So here, I'm setting the value of the start location of the slider to 270, and I'm setting a minimum value of 150 and a maximum value of 360. So that kind of relates to degrees, because that's the kind of set of numbers I've chosen. And the reason it's set to degrees is because we are affecting, if we come here, on value changed, so events relating to that component, as we've done in the past. I'm accessing the directional light, so I've used the getActive class in this case, and I'm affecting the Y rotation of that directional light. And because we know that directional light is part of a night and day, time of day system, it's changing the sun position and therefore affecting the shadows in our world. So it's just a couple of nodes to be able to do that. And then our final slider is related to sharpness. So I've actually added some functionality where the user can crisp up the overall image quality. Now the way that that's handled, same thing, scroll to the bottom, on value changed. And this is actually working with a material in another post-processing volume. I'll go into this in greater detail later, but we're affecting the value through a material parameter collection. So there will be future videos on that, but just to kind of illustrate the point that we're just affecting one set of variables that can then affect something else that relies on those variables. So that's a quick run through of the bug. We will, of course, do a slightly more advanced widget that shows nesting and bringing in real-time data from a spreadsheet in Google Sheets, for example. But that kind of just hopefully familiarizes you with some of the areas. There's tons of stuff in here. I'm still sort of working my way through some of it. I've not kind of worked out everything. So have a little explore and let me know what you find. And I'm going to work my way through them. I'll try and do a video for them all because I want to learn them all. Anyway, thanks so much.
Live long and prosper.